Welcome to the Iferia TechCast, where we bring you all things science, engineering, technology, and innovation. Today, we are joined by Dr. Carl Tolbert. Carl is a former engineer and the founder of Wayward Leaders, where he now works as a leadership strategist. After decades in industrial distribution working with major manufacturers, he identified a critical gap. Organizations were failing not due to lack of technical expertise, but because they weren't effectively leveraging their specialists. He authored the 10 Immutable Laws of Industrial Distribution Specialists to provide a framework for building measurable trust and creating cultures where technical teams can truly thrive. In this episode, we'll explore how to systematically bridge the gap between deep technical skill and tangible business leadership. So, Carl, welcome to the show, sir. It's an honor to have you here.
Awesome. Well, I so appreciate you having me, Ezekiel. This is great. Yeah, I was looking forward to this. This is exciting. I finished the book and, I've been working on it since 2021. This will give your listeners an idea. So if you're in a manufacturing plant, you generally have engineers and maintenance folks at your plant helping to keep machines running, of course. Where industrial distribution is, it's who supplies parts and support to those people. So you have two sides of the equation, the factory folks that work on equipment and then the outsiders that assist helping those folks with their equipment. And I've always been on that outside helping all kinds of different plants, right? But what I found is they have a similar characteristics in my book. Although it addresses the distribution side, which is the outsider side, it actually lends a lot of the information to the maintenance folks and engineering folks as well.
All right. So let's dive in, Carl. Your journey from engineer to leadership strategist is a path many of our listeners are either on or considering. So what was the pivotal moment in your own career that made you realize technical excellence alone wasn't enough and you needed to master a new set of skills?
Right. Well, it's a very common question. And so what happens is you get into a leadership position or like you get into a, like engineering or technical position as a technician. Like I actually started in the United States Navy where I worked on electronics and gas turbine engines. And then I finished my degree while I was still in the Navy, my first degree. And then eventually, because of the military, you always get thrust into leadership, even in the smaller levels, like running a work crew, something like that. It's very paternal. And I think for me, that's what kind of thrusts me into this life of, I started out, when I first got in the Navy, I got into production and manufacturing supervision, and being a crew chief and that. And then I finally got back into maintenance engineering after. And then it kind of led me to this as people get older and more experienced, the leadership around you sort of starts going away. They start retiring. So you have to really step up. And I think a lot of folks are first trying to break into the idea of leadership. I think one of the harder transition is kind of being in the middle. How do you have some responsibility, but how do you get to that next level? Now, what I found in my research is there's a psychological concept called grit, and grit is defined by effort and interest. New leaders often their grit score goes down significantly because they're overwhelmed. And this happens to pretty much all new leaders. I experienced it myself, and I've actually proven it through the research through surveys. I surveyed 500 maintenance folks, and then I also correlated that data to 1,500 additional data points that were outside of my data set. And I haven't published that component yet, but the leaders get burnt out really quickly. And what prevents people from leaving because it's a natural kind of a experience, is the culture of the organizations. And I think that's the message that a lot of these organizations are missing, is that, and even in these high tech arenas, the grit scores, the cultures actually matter significantly.
All right. So, Carl, you talk about technical trust as a critical currency. So, for the engineers and developers listening, how do you translate something as intangible as trust into a measurable systematic framework?
Okay. So, well, trust can be defined by a lot of things, right? So, from a leadership perspective, for me, it comes down to the kind of the golden rule, right? Everybody's heard it. You do what you say what you're going to do, and don't waste people's time. I think that translates a lot, but I think, that's kind of a beginning point of establishing that trust within a culture. But it also comes down to the way leadership acts. You get support, you praise people in the right way, you talk to them. So, part of it is, establishing rules, right? So everybody has a clear expectation. But then the other component is the communication, right? Because I think people lack that communication to all levels of people that are followers to any leader within any kind of group. And I think it's different for us technical folks, because the leaders also have to don a kind of a version of stewardship, right? Because you have a mission and you have to serve that mission. So you're a steward. You don't own it, but you're obligated to own the mission, and everything you do, deals with the people. So you're a servant, but at the same time, you also have to serve the mission. Right? So there's a couple things to unpack, right? So basic things we learned as children, but then it's this communication and rules, and then the fact that you also have to serve the mission equally as much as people. And I think that's a missing component often to the way people look at leadership, especially in the technical fields.
Great. So you are an author. So let's talk about your book, The 10 Immutable Laws. So can you give us an overview of what the book is about, what your motivation was for writing that book, and who the book is actually for, who should read it, who would get value from reading your book?
Well, as I kind of said in the beginning, it's, see, there's two sides of this equation, right? So I wrote the book for the outsiders helping manufacturing plants. They're what we call the application engineers, the specialists, the subject matter experts. So the people that work sometimes on the sales side, sometimes on the brand side. So when somebody calls on a plant and says, "Hey, I represent a bearing or an electric motor or a VFD, a variable frequency drive," then I'm helping the plant who might also have those drives or those components within their systems, right? So it's a very kind of unique class of individuals that work in distribution. And I wrote it for them, but it's good for anybody in the technical fields. Now, why the 10 immutable laws is that when I was working on my doctoral dissertation, I interviewed 32 industrial leaders. And then I've been doing this for about over 20 years. And then I interviewed all maintenance folks. I was talking about the surveys I ran earlier. So all of a sudden, this data started to accumulate, and I started having real data to back up my assumptions. Because I'd worked in this job for so long. So now all of a sudden, the data is there. It's proving a lot of my assumptions, and some of them I got wrong. So then I decided to put in a book that I started working on in about 2021. It's a really good read if you're, engineering, if you're not in distribution, you get a lot out of it, because it's how to be a technical expert within an organization. The rules apply to a lot of places outside of distribution.
Fantastic. So your book outlines the 10 immutable laws. So if you had to boil it down to just one, which law do you technical specialists most often overlook? So and what's the tangible cost of ignoring it?
Well, that's a great one. So the second The second law is about specialization. Or actually, the first law is about, well, I get confused myself sometimes. They all run together. But one of the earlier laws is about specialization versus generalization. So
Mm,
I think that when people generalize so much, they run into a lot of challenges, especially in the engineering and technical trades, whatever you're in. If you're an expert at one thing, nobody can ever take that away from you. And I think that's really where people get kind of caught up in the idea that, hey, I can do more with less. So I have these people that are generalists. I think there's a power behind expertise that's often overlooked. I think that's probably the greatest strength of the book is just that understanding. It's been a guy named Nichols and other people have written about the power of expertise, and especially now with AI and YouTube videos, everybody thinks, well, I can figure this out. But if you have somebody who's spent a lifetime, 20, 30 years in a subject matter, there's nothing other things can do other than supplement that you can't supplant that expertise. A great example is like the Mayo Clinic or the Cleveland Clinic, all these big medical facilities here in the US that have doctors, MDs also running the organization because they feel that you have to be a medical doctor in order to run that organization, which I kind of agree. It's very difficult sometimes in business because you have people that have like an MBA or generalists in business. They come into an organization thinking that translates exactly into running this business because, well, business is business. But the reality is the nuances between different, types of business. I mean, you can't go from healthcare to engineering to the food business. There's challenges translating industries, but there's an assumption that if you're a generalist, you can easily do that, and I disagree. I think that I think focusing on a discipline is very, very important.
all right, great. You say that specialists fail often due to organizational design, not knowledge gaps. So, can you walk us through a real-world example of how a simple, change in a team's structure or process unlocked a specialist's ability to deliver massive values?
Well, yeah, sure. So there's a couple examples. One is having a metric to measure success. I think organizations are ran off metrics, and often specialists and experts don't have a metric to guide to prove success. So that what happens is the people running the business often see you as an expense, right? So because they can't see the tangible success that you have. So I think one of the things is if you have a metric associated with what you're doing, whatever that might be, then all of a sudden you have an easy tool to prove your worth and becomes beyond reproach. I think that for specialists and engineers and stuff that has those things are really, really important. I think that's one thing. And then the other thing is I think that the days of the remote worker are slowly dwindling. I think that people want people in person to come work with them now. I think that the pandemic is over and all the remote work that everybody had to do, I think it's slowly coming back to where people want to work with people. And it's still important to be local to wherever you're working. I think that's another huge component. It's also somewhat contrarian to a lot of folks that still believe remote work is the same. And I beg to differ.
All right. So can you let's talk about your see, move, and stabilize framework. So it sounds like an engineering process for cultural change. So how can a technical leader with limited authority actually apply this to start fixing a broken team dynamic?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. So how I came up with that is there was a guy named Lewin, very famous psychologist and organizational designer, researcher. And he came up with like the idea of unfreezing, changing, and then refreezing. And so it's a very simplistic idea. So I came up with, see, move, and stabilize because it's kind of the same idea, but brings it a little bit more forward. Now, I've researched other types of organizational changes like Prosign, Cotter, and there's all these different techniques and theories. But I find them overly complicated for a lot of people to really just get an idea of how it works. So what C is primarily doing an assessment. Like I would come into an organization, just as an example, you would run a qualitative interviews with a sample of the people. You would like personality profiles. You would do a survey of what I call like the specialist health index, where you kind of assess people's mental state of, okay, I trust my leaders. I'm not going to quit tomorrow. So you have kind of a baseline, right? But then it becomes a discussion with the leadership in that moment, which is the move part, is how do we change the organization from what you currently have in the state? So we have a roadmap. And then you start off with small changes and just follow-ups and feedback. And the stabilize comes with that component. So you've made these small changes and you have some metric and some guidepost, and then you just keep following that up, which is the stabilize piece. So you keep it consistent. So you don't lose the momentum and everything you just work through to get to that point. I don't really think change has to be difficult. I think it just has to be something that everybody fully understands, which really goes back to the rules and communication, we talked about earlier. So I think people overly complicate this stuff, and often it's because there's all these big pollutant theories out there. I just don't think organizations need to really have to go to that extent to have lasting change. I think it can be simply more easy.
Okay, so moving forward, I'd like to know, in the age of artificial intelligence, what is one thing is technical specialists can do to provide uniquely human value that a machine cannot replicate, thereby future-proofing their own career?
Yeah, that's a great question. Obviously, AI isn't foolproof, and you can't blame AI, so it's not blameworthy, which is a whole nother discussion. I think AI has to be kind of like a research assistant and still has to be supervised
Hmm.
by engineers and specialists and users alike. And I'll give you a great example. There's a like a lawsuit going on right now, and I'm not involved with it. I know of it. It's not necessarily public, but it's like somebody made a lot of engineering decisions and changes based solely on AI, and it cost them several million dollars. And there was no human oversight. And I think this is probably one of the earlier cases of people doing this, and they got down to brass tacks. They found out it was purely an AI driven solution. And I think that's kind of a precautionary tale, because we as specialists and engineers, AI is not going away, and it's getting better every day. It's amazing. But the thing is, you still have to have human intervention to oversight it, to
Hmm.
use it wisely. And I think that's the key thing. The other component is that the proximity of a person looking at a problem in a plant isn't going to be replaced, because it's difficult to fly a drone on top of a paper machine. I mean, you still need to go and look at the machine and see it and ask questions, and AI is just not there yet. AI is a tool, but it's never going to replicate the person actually going to look at the problem and investigating the problem firsthand. I think that's really the key thing. You still can't turn a wrench and turn a screwdriver and look at something and feel the heat on your face. You know what I'm saying? It's just AI is just not there. I think that's really one of the most important things, because there's a lot of fear out there. I think some industries, like accounting and supply chain, I think they should have more of a concern, because all they deal with is data. But
Yeah.
for engineers and specialists and application folks and subject matter people, it's different. But I think we still have to be very, very careful about how we use it. And I think if you use it, you also have to own it, which means that you can't blame it, because it's not blameworthy. So if you use it, you have to actually own the results and whatever you're using it for.
Yeah. Yeah, that was really insightful. So, say, for example, we have a newly promoted tech lead, who is still deep in the code. So what is one first impactful habit that they can adopt to start building their leadership credibility without sacrificing their technical edge?
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. So, well, I believe that you have to always continually learn. Well, I'll give you an example. One of the things in the book is about education, right? So I think sometimes we overlook people with experience and other things, and go for people with like degrees. I think that's a wrong approach. I think in my business as a specialist, I think people that come from the plants you're servicing, like say a maintenance supervisor, do far better than somebody with a master's degree in engineering. And that there's a huge component of that because they speak the same language, they act the same as the people they're servicing. There's a certain level of trust just at that moment. But I think that the people that decide that I'm expert enough, no matter if they have experience or education, at some point, a lot of people feel that, hey, I'm not going to train anymore because I can't get any further. I'm the top of my field. And I think that people have to realize that expertise and knowledge has a shelf life. And see, I've been criticized because I've been told I'm a collector because I get new certifications. I learn stuff new all the time, whether it's a new language, a new way of doing AI, and I can't stop. It's embedded in my DNA. And I think engineers and specialists and technical folks need to adopt the same idea because the lifelong learners, you never run into the notion of obsoleting your own knowledge because you're continuing to expand it. Now, as far as new leaders, I think you listen to a lot of the older folks. You acknowledge what they have to say, right? I think that's part of it is that communication, establishing the rules, but understanding that you don't have to take their advice. I think it's part of it is the understanding that you own your own leadership as well, and all of these people give you advice, but it comes down and mostly to heuristics. And I think people get stuck on the way they make decisions, right? And there's no
Mm.
such thing as pure data, and you can't get all the data. I think there's always an uncertainty. But so the question for a new leader is how do you reduce the risk associated with decisions that have a certain uncertainty? I think that's really the most important thing. I think you'll get the relationships, you'll get the mentoring, you'll help deal with all the issues and challenges with people because leading people is messy. But I think one of the things that people talk about is how you make decisions and what do you base those decisions on. I think that's also something that's I think drastically lacking in the modern discussions with leaders right now. Is how do you make those decisions?
All right, all right. So looking at the future of technical work, what shift in how we organize and lead technical teams are you most excited or passionate about?
Well, I think the AI component's huge, right? But I think what I'm seeing though is I'm seeing like if you're in programming, like say I also program Python, but the problem is that if you've made it through your education and you used AI to basically help you code all the time, I think going back to the drawing board and denying AI and like relearning how to structure code on your own is very, very important. Because what happens in the interview process now is somebody's going to give you like a pen and on a whiteboard and ask you to help them create a program in person. So they're going to actively test you. I think that's going to be kind of a new thing through interviews. I think the second part of that is, AI, the generative AI is kind of declining where agentic, the agents is growing. I think the future of engineering, specifically software engineering and programming, is the programmer needs to know how to program, but they need to also manage 5 to 15 agents programming sections of the code. So you're writing the code yourself, you're coordinating agents writing the code as well, but ultimately you have to do the quality assurance and ensure it works at the end, despite having all these other people, these non-people, the agents working on the code with you, that you're supervising. I think all engineering is eventually heading that way. So if I'm doing mechanical, it's the same idea. You still have to have that ownership of the data. Like if I'm doing structural engineering on a bridge, I'm accountable, especially if I have a PE, but I can use AI to assist me, but I still have to own it. I think the agentic part is really exciting. It's going to be interesting to see in the next, say, 3 to 5 years. It's moving very quickly, but I think that's changing the technical outlook of everything. Now, also is like, how do you contend with the digital components? Right. So if I'm I'm a 60-year-old or 70-year-old leader, how do I deal with, the AI component? I think there is a generational thing too that's slowly changing, because as people retire and attrition, the newer people coming up, it's no big deal. In my generation, I didn't have the internet. I didn't have computers.
Mm.
I learned how to use a slide rule actually at one point in the Navy, a little different.
All right. So there's a common question that I like to ask every guest I have a conversation with on this podcast. Tell us, Carl, what does the word innovation truly mean to you? And how does it relate to what you do, your work, and your
Mhm.
life generally?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I had somebody who was creating a job title for like director of innovation recently asked me a question about the same thing. I think innovation, people think it has to be some kind of novelty or some new thing. And I think, first of all, innovation is systems. So
Mm,
you have to create a system that actually involves something, because it's not, innovation isn't like, eureka, I found something. This is this new element like Iron Man. It's not quite like that.
mm,
And I feel that most things are imitations. They're just adapted to other applications that may differ from the original use. So I see imitation a lot more, and it's actually more profitable to take something existing and either expand it or adapt it to some other complete use. We see that in industrial design quite a bit. I think that's something I see. Sometimes I think innovation is overrated. I think the imitation component is good, and I think being consistent is also very, very important as well. Have you ever heard of the Red Queen in Alice in Wonderland or Alice in the Looking Glass? Have you ever heard of the Red Queen? Remember they offer their head.
no, I like to
All
hear
right.
about
Well,
it right now.
Lewis Carroll wrote this book, Alice in the Looking Glass, and there was a part where Alice was running as fast as you can without moving, right? So it became this thing called the Red Queen hypothesis. And sometimes I think that's kind of where we are with a lot of this, is that the innovations or the whatever we're trying to do is just the stopgap, because we're running as fast as we can, but we're really not moving. I think people that look at real genius is a departure from that. I think it's very rare, but I think that most of us, when I hear the word excellence, I think of the Red Queen, because that's really what that means. And that's not a bad thing. I think organizations need to be consistent, but I think sometimes we get the notion of innovation, wrongly. We could talk about this for a long time, but you hear that all the time, like, oh, you're going to be innovative, going to this. And I'm like, oh,
Yeah,
you don't have to be. It's a matter of something that works well. It's consistent. Everybody can do it. Sometimes simpler is better, you know?
yeah, great, great. So it's really interesting to me to always hear different people's thoughts on what innovation means, and you'd be shocked at how diverse different people see the meaning of the word innovation as it relates to them. So that was a really fantastic one there, Carl. So finally, for our listeners who want to start applying these principles, what is the best place or the best first step they should take to go learn more about you, follow you, or perhaps grab your book?
Well, my website, of course, it's simple. It's waywardleaders.com.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. And how I got the word wayward, it was just kind of interesting, as, wayward's defined as, hey, I'm just kind of wandering around
Yeah,
aimlessly. And I kind
yeah,
of was like, well, okay. So kind of stuck. And I have that. And then of course it's my book's on Amazon. So you get the link there on my website, or just go there and, like search for my name. And then I have a training part of the site, which I'm going to start putting courses up. I will have some free courses. So if hopefully in the next month, I'll have a course that's free about how people to finish your degree, right? I am really good at helping people figure out how to finish their degrees if they wish. And I'm going to do that for free. So if you go to my website, certainly keep an eye out for that. I'm going to put that up probably next month or so. Trying
Awesome.
to help some folks out.
Yeah, fantastic. So it's been a really great time talking to you today, Carl, and I'm really excited and honored to have you on the show today.
All right, Ezekiel, man, I appreciate it so much. Thank you.